God, Trump, and the future of America. So, I mean, basically...
Trump would probably like to switch the order of those.
Yes.
But nevertheless.
I would like to remove one of them.
I thought, God, I know. Trump too?
No, remove one from the discussion. The other one, I don't need to remove because I don't have any reason to think he exists, but the discussion is good.
Well, don't you make your life talking about him?
I do spend a lot of time talking about him.
It'd be like if I've spent my life talking about unicorns.
It would be, except that you don't live in a world where the overwhelming majority of people believe in unicorns and are trying to legislate what other people can do based on what they think unicorns want.
Such, what is, since we're into it.
This is how it goes.
Yeah. What is a specific, concrete example of someone trying to do that?
Of trying to...
well, somebody who says, God told me X, and I want you, Matt, therefore, to do Y.
Oh, it's
Who says that? Who takes that position that you're spending your life fighting?
Sure. So, are we in any way suggesting that there's not a particularly loud and well-financed fundamentalist religious right who are stacking the courts in accordance with their ideology, which is influenced by their religious things? I have family members who are primarily single-issue voters. Like, if there's two candidates and one is set out to end abortion and the other one's not, that's the only thing that matters to them. And so I think it puts people in a position where they're probably voting against their own best interests.
Can you name, just pursuing this to see what we're talking about, can you name a single Supreme Court justice who, in your opinion, does not arrive at their judgments for any constitutional or jurisprudential or moral or philosophical reason, but simply consults a divine oracle in order to make a ruling? Can you name one of them?
Oh, no. I'm not in any way suggesting people don't genuinely have these beliefs. It's just that if people's views, like people within all of them, whether they're Supreme Court justices or not, they're going to have particular views on how the way the world's going to work. You and I are. And
sure.
There are people, I have no idea if you're one of them, there are people whose view on how the world should work should be, everything should be working in accordance with my understanding of this deity.
Well, let's take an example, because I think the discussion can become kind of airy if we don't pin it down.
Okay.
Let's talk about abortion.
Sure.
Okay. Did you know, for example, that Christopher Hitchens was pro-life?
I know, for example, that Christopher Hitchens was not pro-life.
Well,
he was. So there's two different aspects of this. First of all, it doesn't matter what Hitchens believed in the first place, but he wasn't in favor of making it illegal. And my primary issue when it comes to like abortion is the legality, not whether or not somebody thinks it's immoral or not.
I interviewed Hitchens years ago for a magazine, and we talked about this issue. And he made what I thought was an interesting point coming from an atheist perspective, which was, he said, look, it's one thing if you say that you believe in Hindu reincarnation in which we have many different lives, or if you believe that there is a life to come in which if you happen to be terminated in the womb, you're going to go to life everlasting. He goes, I don't believe any of that. I believe we have one life. This is it. This is the only one. And so ultimately, it is the greatest value. And if you have a life that is coming into being and it's snuffed out, all its choices interrupted at the outset, he goes, you got to think before you do that, right? Now, let's leave the legality issue, because I think the abortion debate has become radicalized since Hitchens died. Whether Hitchens would have supported late-term abortion, we don't really know. But what I'm trying to say is that here's Hitchens.
And I don't really care.
You don't really care. But the point I'm trying to make is this. You're saying that religious people apply a worldview. And I'm saying you do too. Hitchens does too. All of us have a worldview.
I think I just said that like 3 minutes ago. The issue is whether or not, so if somebody's saying that their worldview is right because it comes from the divine, and there's no demonstration that A, there is anything divine, or that they have any good understanding of what the divine would want, then I would hope that we would agree that that is at least a fallacious appeal to an authority that can't be demonstrated.
Well, but I would argue that first of all, none of us in America conducts a voting test in which when somebody comes into the booth and decides, for example, why do you want to have an abortion? Someone could say, because it's fun. Someone could say, because I think it's a form of birth control. Someone could say, in other words, what I'm trying to get at is we don't conduct a rational scrutiny test to make sure that people who vote about climate change, if someone says, I believe in climate change, I'm like, don't you own a house that's on the water? Yes, you do. Has that house gone down in value? No. Now,
Is that the test for whether?
No. What I'm trying to say
Okay.
is we don't subject people's political views to a scrutiny in which we ask, are there irrational?
In what way?
Well, let's say somebody says.
I'm just trying to make sure I understand what you're saying.
Well, you're saying that when it comes to religious believers, right?
Right.
There's a compartment that they have. Let's call it the divine compartment.
For some of them, sure.
Right. And so they appeal to this, from your point of view, irrational source. And they try to import that source into politics, which according to you is fallacious. They shouldn't be doing that. And I'm saying all kinds of people who are not religious say the wackiest things.
But
and
that's
have
a
the
Tukokay fallacy. That's whataboutism. I would object to anybody doing things on behalf of irrational reasons. I'm just saying that
So you would like to see our democratic process purified of the irrational.
I would like to see our universe purified of the irrational.
Okay, and how would you go about doing that?
Education, by actually teaching people not only critical thinking, but logic and fallacies, so that instead of believing something when they don't have a good reason, they reserve belief until they do have a good reason. You shouldn't believe anything until the evidence actually supports it. What is the evidence for God? What is the reason that anybody should believe there's a God at all?
Okay.
And so far, despite countless debates, nobody seems to have come up with a sound reason for that, and yet they go 10 steps further, which is not only is there a God, but it's this God, and my understanding of this God, and this is how we interact, and the Bible is the true guidebook, or the Quran is the true guidebook, and the question then becomes, we have a proposition, any proposition, whether it's God or climate change or whatever, how do we go about determining whether or not that proposition is reasonable to accept?
Okay.
And on the God front, maybe you have something better than anybody else has come up with. What is the reasonable warrant for accepting that there's a God at all?
Okay, let me try to answer that. I start with the fact that here we are flung into the world with no clear understanding of A, where the universe came from, not the earth, but the universe. B, why we're here and what the purpose of our life is. And C, what, if anything, happens to us after we die. I would argue that, so we are in a very peculiar position. We're human beings, we're flung into the world, and the three of the most important questions we could possibly ask, we have no answer to. Now
I'm going to
hold
agree
on.
with you.
Do you agree or you not agree?
I'm going to agree with you on two of the three. The middle one on purpose, I think, assumes there's a purpose that there's been no demonstration there's a purpose to it.
What, if any, purpose we have for our
Sure.
life? Okay, so now we are in agreement that on the three cardinal questions, we are in a certain kind of blindness. We're in a certain kind of blind ignorance because we don't know, correct?
So I don't. So if we start it, you're saying we're flung into this universe without an understanding of the origin of the universe, the purpose of life, or what happens afterwards.
Right, where the universe came from,
Yes.
who, if anyone, or
Sure.
what made it, if anyone. B, what the purpose of our life is, if any. And C, what, if anything, happens to us after we die.
We are in violent agreement right now.
Perfect. Now, the second question arises, what does science have to say about these three questions? Can science either now, and if it can't now, settle these matters in the future? Let's look at them one by one. Let's take them in reverse order.
Sure.
Can science decide the matter of whether or not there is life after death, yes or no?
It depends.
Depends on what?
So science only deals with the natural world.
Correct.
And so if in fact there's a supernatural existence after this, then it may forever be beyond the purview of science.
Correct. Or if there is another universe that operates according to different laws and we happen to move somehow into that universe, science would have nothing to say about it, correct?
Not necessarily, because
Okay.
if it's a natural, like we have like hypotheses about a multiverse or whatever.
Correct.
I can't say what science will be able to test for in the future, or whether or not we are permanently confined to the cosmos that we experience. I can't say. I can't even rule out, I can't say that science could never say anything about the supernatural. All I can say is that as it stands right now, I'm unaware of any supernatural claim that has any evidence for it that science could evaluate to determine that it was true.
Right. Let's put it a little differently because I don't want to debate the detail here. I just want to look at the macro picture. And what I'm basically saying is Shakespeare said, I think correctly, death is the undiscovered country. No one has been to the other side of the curtain and essentially reported, given us empirical evidence one way or the other, correct? We don't know what happens after death. True?
So here's the thing, and I promise I'm not being difficult. This is just for clarity. As a skeptic, my position is not, like when the psychics who claim that they're speaking with the dead.
Right.
My position is not, they're wrong and that's bullshit. My position is they cannot demonstrate that what they're actually doing is what they claim. And so I can't say nobody's been to the other side and communicated back. I can just say there's no reliable evidence for it, and I don't know what shape that evidence would take in order to demonstrate that.
Okay, I want to come back to that because that you've now made to me a very striking claim, namely that we should, I think you're saying, disbelieve all claims for which there is not sufficient evidence.
So,
not just that we should take an agnostic position, but we should disbelieve them. That's two different things.
Oh, so if you mean disbelieve as in believe they are not true, that's the exact opposite of what I just said.
Okay.
What I said was we should believe things when there's evidence for it, and that is both the proposition that the supernatural is real and the proposition that the supernatural is not real.
Okay.
You can so agnosticism isn't some middle ground between believing X and believing not X. There is no middle ground. You are either convinced of X or you are not convinced of X. And I'm not convinced that the supernatural is real. That doesn't mean that I'm convinced that the supernatural isn't real. It's kind of like if you go into a courtroom,
Okay.
I may have to say not guilty, even if I'm not convinced of innocence, because the burden of proof is on the claim of guilt. And so the people who say, I have good evidential warrant to believe in the supernatural, have adopted a burden of proof, and they have to meet it. And until they do, I am not convinced.
Okay, but let's be clear about what that burden of proof is, because I'm not saying I have definitive proof that God exists or these are his attributes. Here's what I'm saying. I'm saying I don't know if there is a God in the sense of no. I'd call myself a believer. Now, right away, we distinguish between a believer and a knower, right?
Sure.
It's an important distinction.
Knowledge is a subset of belief.
I believe there's a place called Papua New Guinea because I trust maps and I've studied about it. But I know my brother. I wouldn't say I believe I have a brother because I know the guy. So knowledge.
Are you saying you don't know that there's a Papua New Guinea?
No, I'm saying I know it in the sense that I accept the authorities from which I learn about it.
Sure.
I trust it.
Well,
and if
for
I went
clarity,
there,
it's not just relying on authority. It's actual evidence. So you have a belief in a proposition.
right?
Whether or not it qualifies as knowledge is a separate question because knowledge is a subset of belief. In philosophy, it would be justified true belief. I tend to use a more kind of colloquial because I'm a dilettante. I'm an uneducated oaf who just talks a lot. But if you have a proposition and you accept that it's true, that's all I mean when I say I believe it. You either accept it or you don't. If I say I know it, all we generally mean, all most people mean when they say I know something is that they really, 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 really believe it. They're talking about the confidence level that they have in that proposition that it is likely true. And when we say I know something, generally we're saying I believe this to the extent that it would be worldview altering to discover it was wrong. And so I believe there's a Papua New Guinea. I would actually argue that I know, I have evidential warrant that there's a Papua New Guinea without actually ever having been there. This is, people used to do the, you don't know there's an Australia. Well, I do now because I've been there. But even before I was there, I think that I had evidential warrant for it.
Yeah, but okay, I agree with that. And I know that there's a Papua New Guinea in that sense. Let's take a different example. If, let's say I were to tell you I'm from India. Okay? You have no reason to doubt me. You probably believe I'm from India.
Yeah.
Now, you don't actually know that.
It depends on what you mean by know.
Well,
and
are you 100% sure?
No. Is 100% certainty required for knowledge?
Not necessarily, but
I would
what's
agree.
your bar?
So I don't think you can be 100% certain about anything.
Okay.
Which is why I abandon the notion of certainty, which is why when I talk about knowledge, I talk about it as a subset of belief and it is a confidence level. But also, I genuinely don't really, I'm unimpressed when someone says they know something because we don't wait till we have knowledge to act. We act in accordance with our beliefs, and whether or not your belief rises to the level of knowledge doesn't change what your action's going to be.
All right. So let's sort of circle back to where I was going with the three big questions. And I think
we started with death.
You were in violent agreement that the cause, that we don't know, the cause of the universe, we don't know any prescribed purpose for our lives. We try to discover it, but we don't know it. And we don't know what happens after death.
Yeah, I'm not convinced that anything does, but I definitely would agree. We don't know.
Fair enough. Now, let me ask you this question. What do you do about belief when you are in exactly this position? If something is true, it would have tremendous implications. For example, you would concede that if there was life after death, that would greatly affect the way we think about life on Earth now.
It would.
Depending on what that life looked like.
And depending on whether or not anything in this life had any impact on that life.
Correct. But
right. Yes.
So let's just say if the religious narratives are correct, and there is some sort of cosmic justice in which, let's just say, the crimes that are the undiscovered crimes of this life have to be accounted for in a future life, we would probably have to start thinking about all the stuff that we get away with in private, because even though we escape human accounting, there would be some sort of presumably divine accounting. So in other words, all I'm trying to establish is that there's a relevance to these questions, even if we don't definitively know anything about them, anything about the answer matters which way we go.
I agree the answer matters. It's just that the answer right now is, I don't know, and you can play the what if game for any one of them. What if there's nothing? What if it's the end? What if there's a being who's going to judge you based on whether or not you fell for things without sufficient evidence? What if that's the criteria?
Okay, so what you seem to say is, I think about something, and if I really can't answer the question, right, I take the default position that that something doesn't exist until evidence shows up that's going to convince me it does.
Of course.
That's your view.
That is sound epistemology.
Sound epistemology according to whom? According to you.
Sure. We'll just go according to me, because I don't need to cite anybody else.
Right.
Because I'm right. Because
okay, hold on. Let's see if you're right. Let's see if you're right.
The alternative would be to say that I'm justified in believing something before there's sufficient evidence for it.
But I would argue that you do that every day. Let's give you a cardinal example.
But that doesn't change the fact whether I should.
You should. I'm saying you do.
We're all going to make mistakes.
You do and you should. Look, our life is always lived in anticipation of an unknown future, right? You're dating a woman.
Yes.
And so what you do is, you, being a very reasonable guy, plug in all this data, right, about this woman, and you're trying to make a rational decision. Let's say, is this the woman I want to spend my life with? Let's assume you're thinking about that question.
For the sake of your argument, we'll assume I'm thinking about that.
Okay. Now, I would argue that in reality, given the way human beings are, you could never really know what life with this person is going to be like, let's just say over the next 30 years. First of all, you'll be different people in 10 years, different people in 30 years. So this question about what it's going to be like is unanswerable with any high degree of certainty, correct?
Yeah, which is one of the reasons why I, unlike many religions, actually support the notion of divorce, and am opposed to the notion that there's a soulmate out there that you're going to be everything to forever. If we're both in agreement that we don't know what the future holds, I don't make a decision
but
to
if
say...
you'll pardon me, that's a tediously predictable response. I'm not going there. Where I'm going with is the fact...
I didn't think you were going there.
No, because... Right. Where I'm really going with is the fact that in making a decision of whether or not to be with this person, yes or no, you are necessarily taking a huge leap of faith.
No. See, that's the thing. The way I operate my life, and maybe I'm a weirdo, is, so for example, in this case, I have no plans to end this relationship, and neither does she, but we are both adults, and there were two rules: be honest, have fun. That's it. That's all. Be honest, enjoy life. And as long as we're both honest, we can reevaluate the nature of our relationship at any point. I am friends with every one of my exes, including my ex-wife, who I just spoke to. We went into it with this optimism that perhaps we would spend the rest of our lives together. and with the realistic notion that it doesn't happen. Anybody who, the divorce rate's 50 some odd %, anybody who goes into a marriage now thinking, we're never gonna get divorced, is already in opposition with the actual data. And so I, as a huge proponent of David Hume, one of my favorite quotes from him, is that the wise man proportions his belief to the evidence. So my confidence in any proposition, including this particular relationship lasting until I die, is based on whatever data I have. I don't have some delusion that some other people want to run around with. I've found the person and we're definitely going to be together forever because life is uncertain. And it seems that rather than engaging in that self-deception, I'm fine saying, this is what I hope happens. I hope that I am with you for the rest of my life. I hope that, or for the rest of our lives or whatever, but I don't have an unrealistic expectation.
But don't you make plans?
Sure, I make plans for tomorrow because that's the pragmatic.
You don't buy insurance, you don't build homes, you don't make plans, you don't put money into a 401k, and you don't put money into educational funds.
Yes.
You do. Right. So in other words,
that's because I have a reasonable confidence based on data about how long I'm likely to live and what benefits are likely to be rewarded from there.
Based on
not an exercise of faith.
Let me ask you this.
Because what you're talking about is confidence in the absence of certainty. But my confidence is proportional to the evidence. The fact that there isn't certainty about the future doesn't mean that it's an exercise of faith.
I'm saying that the evidence you're invoking is bogus, because according to you, if the divorce rate were 5%, you would make lifetime plans, because according to you, there's a much higher chance, 95% probability.
No, that's not remotely what I said.
Well, it is kind of what you said.
I would make lifetime plans because I hope to have a lifetime.
If I was Socrates walking in Athens in the 5th century BC, and I looked up in the sky, I'd see 7 stars, right? Now, if I was taking the rationalist position, I would say, well, I see 7 stars. I have no reason to believe that there are any more stars in the sky. And
just for clarity.
Yes.
Are you saying this is remotely accurate, or is this just an example? Because anybody who thinks that back then people only saw 7 stars, I got problems with.
No, fair enough.
Okay.
Fair enough. I'm using the limited radius of our empirical knowledge.
I knew that. Just for your benefit, it's an analogy. Yeah,
right.
You got it.
And you know so the ancients knew the Earth is round and so on. But the point here is that you have this limited body of data. But if you really reflect on the data, and you also reflect on yourself, right away you see, hey, I'm Socrates. I've never moved 5 miles away from the place I was born. I don't even know how big the Earth is. There could very well be a whole bunch of other stars out there, and just because I have not 1 ounce of empirical evidence for them, I can't be close to them or declare them out of bounds or declare that my whole life is to be lived without regard to that possibility. Well, because it's a very real possibility.
So let's say you and I both lived on this particular plot of land in New York our entire lives, and we had only ever seen 7 stars.
Right.
I'm not ruling out the possibility that there are 7 other stars. I'm dealing with people who are saying there are more than 7 stars, and they can provide no evidence for it.
Right, but let's just say that those people who say that there are more than 7 stars, right, have the following type of reason for saying that. They say, first of all, let's just say that we're part of a natural universe, right? This is Kant's the starry heavens above. And they also know that I can't see very far, so because I only see 7 stars and I know that I can't even see a guy who walks over the horizon, I probably think there are a whole bunch of other stars that I just can't see because my eye only goes that far. Would that be an irrational reason to believe in more stars even though I only see 7?
Yes.
It would be irrational, according to you.
So, while you can come up with that as a justification, the reason that it seems like, I'm talking within your analogy of
within my analogy.
We've only ever seen 7 stars. That is not, so we have deductive reasoning, and then we have inferences, which is basically where science operates, and then there's abductive reasons. And abductive is going to be the weakest. And abductive is going to be arguing towards the best explanation. And in that case, we need candidate explanations. What you're talking about is an inference that seems intuitive, but has no evidence to actually support it.
It does.
The fact that I can only see so far should guide my brain to say I should not be reaching conclusions about what is beyond my ability to see.
Okay, so let's take, for example, you've seen a certain number of dogs in your life, correct?
Yeah, tons of them. She stops at every one.
Right. above and beyond that, you haven't seen other dogs that are outside the radius of your empirical experience, true?
Correct.
Do you believe that there are other dogs other than the ones you've seen?
I have evidence of other dogs on Earth.
What's that evidence?
I've seen video footage. I have.
Okay,
met
but
people
let's
in
just say the
different-
video footage, let's count those among the dogs you've seen. What about the dogs you haven't seen?
Sure.
You believe they exist?
On Earth, yes, but if you tell me that I should then believe that there are dogs on Saturn, that's the level of thing we're talking about.
No,
here.
it's not. It's not. Absolutely not. See, this is the heart of the matter. This is the heart of the matter. Because according to you, religious people believe that there is a God who, like in ancient Greece, inhabits the natural world that's living on another planet. And so your reasoning is at the level of the cosmonauts who go up into the sky and go, no God up here, therefore God doesn't exist.
No, that's not it.
Well, you just said that I'm proclaiming a dog on Saturn.
Yes.
And I'm saying that's not what I'm doing at all.
So if I can only see 7 stars, there is a weak inference that there may be more stars, but to believe there actually are more stars isn't yet justified by the evidence. The dog example on Earth, even though I have not experienced every dog, I can actually do pretty much a rough estimate of dog by searching through data on how much dog food we sell, how many people buy Kong things for their dogs, how many Pets R Us are scattered around the world. There's all sorts of data that get to this thing where now it is a strong inference that there is a dog in China that I have never met and will never meet. Do I believe that that's the case? Yes, because that's where the data point to. To go beyond what the data show,
Okay.
to say that just because I know that I have a limit to my vision and I can see 7 stars, therefore I believe there are more, that is to go beyond what the data presents. You could, though, invent a telescope and improve your vision and get new data, which is exactly what we did to discover that we don't just live in the one and only galaxy and that the Earth isn't the center of the universe. Once we got that data, we began to have a better understanding of it. There are things like the Higgs boson, for example, which are a part of theoretical physics that we didn't have physical, empirical evidence for, but that the math pointed to. I'm not in any way denying that math is good data, which is one of the reasons why, well, all right, I won't go there yet because we're still on.
Well, I mean, here we are on common ground. If you're talking about science, if you're talking about quantum physics, if you're talking about relativity, if you're talking about the Big Bang, if you're talking about evolution, we have nothing to argue about. I'm on board with you 100%.